and welcome to another Top 5 board gaming video. Today's video is actually going to be exceedingly unusual for several different reasons. First and foremost is actually the theme. Today we're going to be talking all about time. That's right, today's theme is games about time travel. It's something that's relatively unusual, but more importantly for the purpose of this video is that it's something that is very rarely done well. In board games, it can be exceedingly difficult to get sort of the nuances of time travel and paradoxes and things like that. And there's some games that do it very, very well. There are other games that do it exceedingly poorly. The other very unusual thing about this particular video is that I actually don't own any of the games that I'm going to be talking about. I prefer to think of it as it's non-linear time, so I already do own them. It's just that either in this particular universe or at this exact moment in time I don't own them. But, you know, since I own them later on, then yeah, I own them. I mean, it's just, they're just not here right now. But either way, I think this is going to be a really fun one. It's, again, something that's relatively unusual, but that I find very, very cool. It's a really fun thing that I know is very difficult for designers to balance, but I think that the games that I picked, first off, obviously, I hope that you guys like them personally, but secondly, I believe that they capture the idea of time travel and the effects of changing the past and things like that relatively well. So without further ado, I will go ahead and get started with my number 5. And number 5 is a game that actually is the one that matches my shirt today, and it is the Doctor Who solitaire game. This particular game is unusual for a couple of reasons. First and foremost is that it really is only a solitaire game. You cannot play it with other people. And secondly, the way that it works is essentially as a choose-your-own-adventure. If you ever read those types of books back in the 90s and everything, where you just read through it page by page by page, and you have no clue what's going on because you didn't read to the very bottom where it said flip to page ever, whatever it is. But for the purposes of right now and for the purpose of today, the Doctor Who solitaire game is really, really a lot of fun. If you guys are fans of Doctor Who, then obviously you're familiar with a lot of the different characters, a lot of the bad guys, all that kind of stuff. And the way that it works is really, really simple. All you have is a few rule books and you just need a couple of dice. And that's it. All you do is you just read through the particular scenario that you're going through, whatever adventure it is. The game gives you the various choices that you're allowed to take, how you resolve those particular choices and things like that. Now the thing is that this is a little bit lower on the list. First off, because it's only solitaire, you can't play it with other people even if you wanted to. And secondly, because as far as the time travel aspect goes, if you've ever seen Doctor Who, you know that they sort of kind of gloss over a lot of the time traveling issues that can potentially arise whenever you're going back. But you know, it's like you go back in time and somebody knows who you are, but this is back in your time frame over here, but it's actually in their time frame up here, so they've already met you, but you don't remember meeting them because in your time you haven't met them, and never mind. It's really weird, but watch the show. It's really cool. Suffice it to say that the game itself is really cool, and it really does capture a lot of the essence of Doctor Who and the feeling of watching the show, and especially if you're rewatching it and you know what's going to happen, you're just like, no, don't go there, you know, that kind of stuff. It's a lot of fun. And the nice thing is it does have a decent amount of replayability, but again, part of the reason that it's lower on the list is simply because there's only so much you can do with a limited number of adventures. There are a decent number, so it'll keep you occupied for a relatively long while, but even so, there comes a certain point where you just have to be like, I gotta go and do something else because I remember what happens or whatever. The biggest thing being that because you're using dice, then you can obviously change the outcomes of how things work and all that kind of stuff. But either way, it is a fun game. I obviously do recommend trying it out. The Doctor Who solitaire game, my number 5 time traveling game. I've got a game that comes to us courtesy of the guy who created Dominion. For those of you who know who that is, then you probably also know that the game itself is Tempurum. Or is it Temporium? It's probably Tempurum because Temporium sounds like a Japanese appetizer. Either way, Tempurum is a game where the idea is that you are essentially you're trying to move objects through time is really the idea. You've got these little crowns that sort of represent victory points, and you're literally moving them down the board. The time traveling aspect comes from the fact that you've got individual cards on different sections, and you can change where the timeline goes. So for example, you've got multiple forks, you start up here, and then you've got a single fork, and both of those forks go to 2 forks and 2, etc., etc. I believe it's got 4 levels total, if I'm not mistaken. But the time traveling aspect is, it's not necessarily an afterthought, but it really doesn't feel too time travel-y, which is why this is lower on the list. It's still a pretty decent game. It's still a decent amount of fun, and the idea is that you're playing cards that allow you to move the guys forward. You can also use different actions depending on what location you're at, things like that. It's got a lot of good, solid replayability because the cards are randomized as far as what's going to be at what location. Now, you do have, for level 1, you've got this stack of cards. For level 2, you got this stack, etc., etc. But it's still random as to exactly what combination you're going to get. So it's, in that sense, it's pretty cool, but as far as the actual time traveling and time adjustment aspect, it's maybe not necessarily an afterthought, but at the same time, it doesn't feel like it's really, really integrated within the game. And it doesn't feel like time travel is, I guess, the best way to put it. But at the same time, you can see like alterations in the past or the present, whatever it is. The thing that I like to do personally when I play is I like to sort of have a narrative going with whenever you change what happens with the timeline, then you have to explain what changed, how that got altered, all that kind of stuff. So for example, if you go from, hippie land to post-apocalyptic wasteland, then the Cold War went to an actual thermonuclear war, and we ended up in Fallout 3 instead of, happy-go-lucky daisies all over the place type of thing. That kind of stuff. But again, that's just how I play. The game itself, it could be a lot better, but as far as time-traveling games go, it's not bad. It's not exceedingly convoluted. It's relatively easy to understand. The goal is very clear and straightforward and pretty simple to achieve in the end. So, I mean, it's a good game, but it's not higher on the list, and that's basically why. Tempurum, my number 4. And number 3 is a game that really does start to feel like you're having a really big effect on other locations. The game itself is Chronos, very aptly named, obviously. And the idea behind this game is you actually have multiple boards that you can move between, and each board represents a different time period. The really cool thing about this is that you can start to see the effects of you do something in the past, and it really affects the other locations, the locations that are downstream, so to speak, from it. So like if you start building buildings in one location, then they'll get finished later on, whatever it happens to be. Like anything related to time travel, though, the game itself can be a little bit convoluted, especially for newer players. But as far as time traveling games go, it's relatively simple. Again, with Tempurum, that's like really base level, absolute minimum time travel feel. Chronos, I mean, you've got very, very well thought out themed boards. You've got the Middle Ages, you've got the Modern Age, you got Stone Age, all that kind of stuff. So it really feels more like you're traveling in between different time periods and that kind of stuff. So I really like the feel in that context a lot more. I think that it works really well for this game, and just in general for a time travel aspect. I love the fact that this is really the type of game where you start to see effects of, if you do something here, then, you know, downstream, something else is actually going to happen, and you see that in a gameplay mechanic rather than, like in the case of Tempurum, you move the little lightning bolt, for example. I know, I keep ripping on Tempurum. I feel kind of bad. But that's why it's number 4. I'm just saying. But either way, Chronos, absolutely amazing game. It really is a fun game, a great example of how time travel can be done well and balance it reasonably with the difficulty of the game itself. And in the end, my number 3. At number 2, I've got a game that is actually just a very simple card game that plays somewhat similarly to Flux, if you guys are familiar with that. The game itself is Chrono-nauts. Now, this is a really interesting game because I love the fact that this is the game that I wanted time travel to be. This is the one where you've got individual cards that talk about, like, the JFK assassination or the Lincoln assassination. You know, you've got things like the Berlin Wall getting torn down or not getting torn down, things like that. And not only are you seeing it in a historical context, but you're talking about actual events that you can go back and alter. And in that sense, it's really, really fun. It's a great game. And I think the biggest thing for me personally is that it works very well as a card game. It's a lot simpler. You know, when you've got a board, then it feels a little bit more static, or it really can feel a little bit more static. Whereas with the cards, you know, you've got a lot better ebb and flow and an organic type of gameplay style, as well as interaction amongst the players as well. And this is really one of the things that I absolutely love, is the sense that you start to get like the time paradoxes and things like that, where, for example, if JFK didn't die, for example, then, you know, why would we have the same president afterwards? Or I think it was Nixon, now I want to say. But for example, JFK was assassinated, and if he wasn't assassinated, then would he have been able to see the astronauts land on the moon? You know, stuff like that. I honestly don't remember if that exact option is in there, but it should be. But just random things of that nature. You really start to get the time paradoxes. As players, you have to try to control for those. And one of my favorite things about it is that every player has a secret objective, whatever it is that they want to do. So you don't know what anybody else is really trying to accomplish. All you're trying to do is to accomplish your own thing, and it very well could be that somebody else's goal directly conflicts with yours. That's the whole point of a game like this, and it's a ton of fun. And it's, again, very, very simple, just a nice little card game that you can play relatively easily. It's really simple to pick up, and I think that it's a really perfect match between the theme of time travel and the mechanic of just a relatively simple basic card game, because then you can really get a better feeling of actually going through time and really having a more drastic effect on some of these things. So with that, Chrono-nauts is my number 2. At number 1, I've got a game that actually came to us courtesy of Kickstarter. Unfortunately, I missed it because, again, I actually don't own any of the games that are on this list. Well, I do own them, but we're not quite at that stage of, you know, the universe yet. But we're getting there. We're getting there. But either way, the game itself is called Legacy Gears of Time. Now, this is a game that I absolutely loved when I first played it. It's a really, really wonderful combination of if you played them, it's sort of a combination of both the Chrono-nauts as well as Tempurum, where the idea is that you're able to change events, you're able to drastically alter events, but at the same time, you have a somewhat static entity from which you're working. You do still have a board in this case. I love the way that it works because you got something so very simple, such as being able to perform scientific experiments. Yes, that's absolutely vital to this, and that's really the whole premise of the game, is that you're talking about technologies, you're talking about when things came about in human history and things like that. I love the mechanics where round by round the idea is that narratively, the idea is that you've got a time machine that goes backwards. It goes backwards, it goes backwards, and then at some point, i.e. the end of the round, everybody is forcefully pulled back to the present time. So mechanically what that means is you can only move backwards during a round. Once you move to a certain stage, then you can't move forward again until the next round. You can only move back. So strategically, that creates an incredible feeling because you really have to be absolutely certain that you want to move. Now, you can go all the way from the present back to the very, very, very far past if you want to, but it's really not very recommended because that means that you'll just be stuck there, and maybe you'll be able to play cards, maybe you'll be able to play some influence, but there's really not a whole lot else you can do. And I just really like it because then at the end of the round you expand out the board so you can add more technologies, and then every time period in the past before that is now allowed to include an additional technology, with a lot of the point being that you're essentially usurping other technologies. So in period 2, for example, if you've got science being basic scientific process being discovered or first being done, then somebody can play it in period 1, and then the one that's in period 2 goes away because now it's been invented previously and it cancels out whatever was before it. So just stuff like that is so cool, and it creates a absolutely amazing feel of strategy and a very unique strategic decision-making process that you wouldn't see in any other game type other than this sort of time-traveling aspect. It's a ton of fun, and I'm really, really sad that I wasn't able to get it. I'm hoping that at some point, well, I know at some point I'll be able to do it because, future me is out there somewhere playing it right now. But either way, it's a lot of fun, and I hope that the universe lines up sooner rather than later, technically, so to speak. But either way, Legacy Gears of Time, absolutely wonderful example of how time traveling should be done, and that it really can work in a board game, and in the end, my number 1. Well, that's it for me, folks. I hope that you enjoyed this video about time-traveling board games and board games related to travel through time in some form or another. As always, and as per usual, please put any and all thoughts and feelings in the comments below. Do you have specific games that you enjoy in this category? I know I said at the beginning that this is something that's relatively unusual because it's somewhat out of the ordinary in general, where you don't see a lot of these types of games. And do you think that it's because you think that they really can't work well? I mean, clearly there are games that do it well, but I mean, are you just worried that, do you not want to have the samey? Do you think that nothing really new and novel can come in this style of game? All that kind of stuff. I'm always anxious to hear what you guys have to say. Please put anything and everything in the comments below. Do you like the... Oh, excuse me. You like the games that I talked about? Do you like other specific games? All of that good stuff. Thank you so very much for watching this, and I will see you next time. Thank you very much for, at long last, being able to watch my top 5 time travel-based board games. Again, this is a very unusual category, and I'm anxious to hear what you all have to say about it. Please put any and all feedback in the comments below, as always. In addition, I also have several of my video playlists linked up at the top of the page, so you can see some of my latest work, and if you want to see more of me in the future, click on the big giant subscribe button. Plus, you can follow me on Twitter at DannyCGamingSci, so that you can see when I post new board game videos, as well as when I start live streaming video games. Thank you very much again for being here finally, and I will see you next time.